Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second session of the Time Machine Academy on methodology and workflow of virtual reconstruction. Today, my role is going to be very, very small in the sense that I will skip an initial presentation on Time Machine. I'll just show this quick reminder of what we covered in our session actually 2 weeks ago, so on June 16. Apologies, these dates are still the old ones. So today, June 30, we're in session 2, and next session is going to be in 1 week time. So last week we covered the virtual reconstruction, just an introduction on the training, an overview of this course, some basic concepts, and a bit of a glance at different aspects of virtual reconstruction. And today we're going to focus, our instructor Daniel Pletinckx is going to focus on how do we move from the archival object, so from the source document, so to speak, to the 3D model. And without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll let Daniel start his screen sharing and his presentation. Just a quick reminder that if you have questions, we invite you to write them in the chat so that we can then ask them at the first break, which we're going to have around 1 hour clock into the meeting. And or I can stop Daniel immediately if it's a question that really needs to be addressed on the spot. And then, of course, we have time at the end to cover any further questions you may have. So please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilaria. Apologies for last week because I was not able to present. I was the flu killed me, and also this week we were a bit let's say plagued by our friend Murphy. I had a very busy week, of course, and in one of the meetings a couple of days ago, my computer was kind of stolen. And we thought it was stolen, but it was a very enthusiastic cleaning the team that had taken it away. So I'll get my computer back this afternoon or this evening better. And so, well, that will be okay. But that made, in fact, the process of making this presentation ready quite a bit heavier and quite a bit more difficult than intended to be. And so I will present, let's say, about 80% of what I was intended to present, but I will shift a couple of small things to next week so that we will cover that some aspects next week in the session next week. I'm very sorry for that, but that's the very best I could do now. So let me start, in fact, by addressing, first of all, the homework. And I hope that everybody was able to give it a try and try to find out, in fact, the different questions that I have put. And it seems to be that my questions were quite difficult questions. I gave the suggestion to make a sketch of the thing, and to look a bit at the iconography which was there and the images that I provided. So, well, it's all about how such walls work, and I found out by doing the reconstruction of this project that, in fact, the whole system of an 17th century fortress, earthwork fortress, in fact, is not well documented in the documentation or in the resources which are available. But also when I ask experts, in fact, this is something that is not so well understood. And you know, as I'm a civil engineer, I try to find out how things work. And also through the 3D visualization we make, we try to show how it works. So that was in fact the basic of the question. And the question is, how do these walls work? And if you have an outer wall, which you see depicted here in the bottom, which has this gentle slope, and then it has a part where you can stand, and then it has a part which is more receded. So that means in fact that you're lower. And the question was, are the soldiers in fact behind the wall? Are they protected against musket fire? People that fire their musket from, let's say, a distance from about 50 meters maximum, or are they protected also against gunfire? And the correct answer is you're protected against both, and only 1/3 of the people got that right. Why is that? Because in fact, you see here, if you make a sketch, that you have to fire from quite close up. So you fire over the wall. So here in this zone, you're protected. And gunfire, in fact, is nearly only possible from the river. So if you have a boat there that fires its cannon, they shoot, in fact, not in a curve, but they shoot, in fact, nearly straight on. So at 5 degrees, like was in my text. So that means, in fact, that the bullet also comes in at maximum 5 degrees. So that means, in fact, if you draw that in a sketch, then you see that you have really a protected zone where you can walk, where you can distribute your soldiers, where you can organize yourself, etc. So this is called the protected walkway. So that's indeed only 1/3 of the persons got that right. So if there are any questions, let me know, and then we can continue on that. But that's the way these things work. And more in detail here, you see that. Okay, so next question is now the other type of the other walls. The inner walls are higher up, so they're really behind a ditch with water, and then you're higher up, and here you're at 5 meters, let's say. So this wall is about 6.5 meters high. And are they protected there against gun and musket fire? Well, the answer is even more difficult for most people. Only 13% of the people got it right, because you're protected against musket fire only. That means, in fact, if you're standing here in the protected zone, not of course here, because there you try to shoot. If you're standing here, you're protected against musket fire. That's what you see here also in the picture. Nobody can see you. Nobody can hit you directly with a bullet. But if you're standing there, and let's say from the river, a gunboat is shooting a bullet at you, the bullet comes in at a small angle, 5 degrees, it can hit you. And that is indeed the reason why, in fact, if you're there, you can be hit by gunfire if you're in really an siege, or if you're in an attack. So that means, in fact, that people had a solution for that. They used what they call gabions. So these are these kind of things. In fact, it's a woven mat that you fold in a cylinder, and then you fill it up with earth. And you can do that in hours. You can, in a couple of hours, you can set up these things on your wall, and that gives you extra protection against incoming bullets from guns, not from muskets. So that is the way these things work. And you see that, in fact, very few experts know this. Again, this is something, by doing reconstruction, you find out these things, and you go after them because you want to visualize these things, and you want to know how these things work. And that, again, is a proof, in fact, that virtual reconstruction as a research tool really helps you in understanding these things, and to get them also visually right. Question 3 was a kind of, how would I say that, a bonus. But it goes together, in fact, with the whole configuration there, because in fact you have this small step. If you're on the step, you can shoot. If you're below the step, you're more or less a bit protected. And as I said, if they're really attacked, they put up these gabions. We checked that. It's in the text, in the archival text, they mention that. Nowhere they describe, of course, this is the way we do war. That's what they don't describe in the archival text. But they do have to buy these things, they have to provide these things and so on. So it's in the archival texts, and so it's documented, it's proved, it's validated, in fact, that these things are used. Now, the other thing I was saying here, in fact, is that if you have this kind of small step, what do you do with your gun? What you do? How do you put that? Well, the guns are always placed on a wooden platform, and the wooden platform is slightly sloping, slightly going up. And that means, in fact, if your gun is shooting, then your gun recoils. Let me show you. Your gun recoils, and then, in fact, your gun needs to come back. And this is a heavy thing, so it's always easier. Because of the slope, it stops, and because of the slope, it comes back. It was a very simple way of doing it, but that's typically the way these things were done in that time. So the correct answer, most people had that correct. It's really to stop the gun recoil. Okay, that's the homework stuff. If you have really burning questions about that, if you don't get certain things, please let us know, and then we'll help you further. But it is important, in fact, to not only to understand these things, but to get the process of understanding these things, because that's what virtual reconstruction is about. Okay, not again. Next slide. Okay, so today we're talking about how do we get from archival data to virtual reconstructions. And archival data, most people think of iconography or plans, maps, whatever. Most of that is text. You would be surprised, and also in this project, Lillo and its counterpart, and you know, it's a double fort on both sides of the river. So Lillo and Liefkeshoek, both were documented in a very extensive study of more than 10 years by a Dutch guy called Han Leune. And you only see book 1 of these 7 volumes that he has published on this. It's over 5,000 pages. And so he has used several approaches, in fact, to describe this archival data. Volume 1 is a kind of thematic approach. It is more or less also following the timeline, but on the other hand, it really goes in themes. How is the military organization? How are the people that are living there, etc., etc. But he also provided all the transcriptions of his archival data. And that's very interesting because, in fact, it brings us really close to the source. Why is that important? Because when we do reconstructions, in fact, we have a lot of virtual reconstruction questions. And we cannot expect that this poor guy has solved all our questions. No, he hasn't. Of course, he has many things described, and many things that we need are properly described in the book, in the thematic part mostly. But there are many other practical details, practical things that are not described, and then we can find them back in these transcriptions. And luckily, we have the version of this book in a digital form. So after 10 years of 9 years after publishing, they made an, let's say, a digital version, and we just have these digital files that we can search, in fact, through keywords, etc., to find things back. And in fact, many of those texts are very, very valuable. So that means not only you can find answers to your questions, and by searching on it, but also a lot of things that we have from iconography, from other sources. We say, okay, this is a hypothesis. We want to reconstruct it like that. We can validate them through the texts and see if the text really is saying what we think it should say. And validate, in fact, if our hypotheses are correct or not by the texts themselves. So this again shows the importance of textual information on virtual reconstructions. Most people don't think that way, but in practice, it is that way. Okay. Right, let's come to business and try really a lot of examples so that you get the feeling of the process that I described last time, and which is you have sources. Sorry. Text, iconography, whatever, paintings, and how do we use them? How do we use them in making our reconstructions, in putting our research questions, in putting our hypotheses? How do you use that? And I thought it was useful to start with the aspect of, okay, what do you need to be careful for? Because when you look at 17th century sources, most of these things look very realistic. And you say, oh my God, beautiful detailed pictures. It's like a picture. It's not an image, it's a picture, a photograph from the 17th century. Are they really like that? Are they really trusted? And that's what we called in the process of virtual reconstruction in the beginning, source assessment. Is my picture to be trusted? And that's the reason why I come up with a number of problems that you need to be aware of in trusting or not these sources. Let me give you some of these problems. The first problem I called the etcher problem. Today, we have our smartphone, we just push the button and we have an image. But making images in the 17th century was a bit different, and especially images that could be distributed, that could be printed in a large volume, or not. But making an image was typically making a sketch. You know the content, you make the sketch, and you give your sketch to an etcher, to somebody who really can, on a copper plate, draw the drawing, make the drawing, assemble the drawing, make a beautiful drawing, and print that. But these people are unqualified for your subject. If you're a military expert, and we will see immediately a lot of examples of that, you're not qualified as an etcher in military stuff. You're an etcher, you engrave copper plates and you have them printed. So that means, in fact, these people have to draw things that they don't know. They have not seen these things. And we'll give you an example in a minute about that. But that's important to understand, that the process of making these kind of images, also paintings, it's the same kind of thing. In many cases, they have not seen what they have drawing or painting. The second problem is what I call the dyslexia problem. And we see that regularly, that people, even as today, switch, for example, left and right. You see here this image. This is not from Lillo. I did not have an example from Lillo of this error, but this is from an other project. This is very end of the 16th century even. And this church has been very well studied, excavated, so we know this church really in detail. And one of the things you see in this church is this door. This door never has been there. We know that from the walls, and they have been completely naked. We know there is no trace of a door here. There is a trace. There is a door. There has been a door on the other side of the church. So the guy who made, in fact, the edge had probably sketches and notes, and okay, there is a door on this side of the church, and it took the wrong side. This is a typical error. You see that regularly in, so sometimes you need to be a bit careful about these things, and that left and right are easily, in this time, easily switched. And that's also because, in fact, at that moment in the 17th century, they were only starting to be publishing graphical stuff. So they did not have yet the kind of publishing skills and the kind of editorial skills that we have today. So one of the famous people that in the 16th century here in Flanders made an illustrated atlas, let's say, guide, atlas of all the beautiful buildings and castles and so on. It took them 4 years of really struggling to get that editorial process right, to have his editor doing what he wanted to do, etc., etc. So be careful that indeed some mistakes come from this editorial process, from not checking errors in your sources. Another problem is that what I call the copy problem. The copy problem is paintings, for example, and also many etches were expensive things. They were unique. And so in this way, etches were, of course, not unique, but they were printed in a low volume, so they were quite expensive. And it was a thriving business in the 17th century to copy paintings and copy other etches by etching. So that means you get a print of an etch, and from that print you make a new copper engraving to etch and to print. But that means, in fact, your etch plate is mirrored. So your image that you're drawing then is mirrored. You can very precisely copy that image, but it is mirrored. And typically you see also small errors in the copying process or in interpreting what is there. And so these kind of small problems give away that it has been a copy, in fact, of an etch. What we always try to do, we see that regularly, especially in the 17th century, is trying to find the original one or the most original one. So let me give you an example of this. It's not exactly Lillo, but it's very similar. That's another project we did with the fortress, also 17th century, which is called Aardenburg. It's in the Netherlands. And Aardenburg has been sieged by the French troops in 1672. And their siege was not successful. So they were not able with 6,000 soldiers to take a city with 600 inhabitants. Big shame, but that's the way it was. So it has been depicted very regularly. This was a big success for the Netherlands, and they were able to encounter this siege. And when you look at it, in fact, you see it's a copy. Why? Because we know what we see here, that is the south side of the city. So that means if we look at the church, then the church is pointing in the wrong direction because your choir of the church is on the east side. But what we see when looking from the west is the west side. So this is clearly a mirrored image. So the image should be like this. That's the right way to see the image. And if we look at the details, in fact, now our church is oriented in the proper way. The church is very well depicted because the church is still standing even. So we know from a lot of details, this is very well done. But for example, there is a small copying problem here, because this tower is standing on the roof and it's depicted as standing behind the roof. You see that? So that means, in fact, this is the kind of small errors that are introduced in this copying process. But for the rest, this is one of the very best images we have. It contains all the details are very correct, are very precise, and it even contains these gabions that I showed before. It's one of the only images that really shows this. And so the conclusion of this is, although this is a copy, although in fact it's mirrored, this is one of the best and reliable images that we have, in fact, of this siege. And in this way, this is very useful, in fact, to depict that. Okay. Couple of other problems, pitfalls that we have. In the 17th century, like I said, they were very realistic paintings and engravings, and like you see here, and the guy holding his pass glass. Remember the previous session, his pass glass, and it's like a picture. It's like a snapshot that you take with your smartphone from the 17th century. Or is it? Well, there is typically these things are full of symbolism. They were fond of putting a lot of things in there, and of course it has a certain style. And one of the styles that in fact was used in that time is that this is the people who are living in rural area, not the rich people in the cities that commission these kind of drawings. And they wanted, of course, to show off that they were much better. And of course, these people are depicted much poorer than they really were. You see here the walls are very poor. If they put up a painting, then it's all wrinkled and shredded and so on. In all the details, you see that in fact it's a certain style. But was it like that? No, it wasn't. So we need to see through that, because on the other hand, in the picture, there is a lot of details which are very, very good. For example, the clothing is very, very precise, etc. So you need to see through the symbolism that is there and differentiate what is reality, what is really there, and what is symbol. And that, of course, requires some experience in seeing these things. There have been a lot of publications on this topic, but it is important to know that, let's say 80% of this drawing is useful for reconstruction, but you need to see what is symbol and what is not, what is reality. Another problem is what I call the client problem. Who commissioned the iconography? There is always a reason if, for example, a city or a building or whatever is commissioned, is made, that in fact, there is a reason behind that making. There is a reason behind the existence of that iconography. And we'll come immediately to that problem. Another problem is what I call the modern bias problem, is that we look, of course, to these things with our eyes of today. And we sometimes forget that we take a lot of things for granted. Things were in the past different. Remember, the past is a foreign country and with totally different rules. So we need to, if we do interpretation, we need to be careful not to look too much to these sources with our modern eyes of today. I'll give a nice example of that immediately. And then also what we call the omitted detail problem is we don't take, these things are not photographs, these things are made, and sometimes these things get omitted for one reason or another, and it's not because they're not there that the details are not present. So I'll give another example of that. Okay, the client problem. So we had this from the question and answer last time, and so this is one of the very good drawings of Lillo. But we have this structure here, which nowhere on any other source appears. It is not visible, even not today in the terrain. Nowhere you see this. So why is this? Well, probably, and I need to say probably because we don't have a validation in the written sources, but this has been made in a time there was an extreme tension between the Netherlands and the Spanish troops, the Spanish military, in fact, who was holding the Netherlands and Antwerp, who was holding the south of Belgium, let's say, the south of the Low Countries, sorry, yeah, and who was holding Antwerp, of course. So there was a lot of tension. And of course, they must have had a meeting and to say we need some more fortifications to counter an attack from that side, etc., etc. But typically, we would find that back in the archival data that there was a meeting about that, but we didn't. We didn't find it back, so it must have been done without any documentation, or at least not documentation that we have today. Is it wrong for that? No, we can clearly see that there is a part which is kind of proposal, and there is a kind of which is existing situation. And that is the way I think we need to interpret it. And so in this way, the client problem is, okay, where it has been commissioned for, what was the purpose of the drawing, and then from that understand what is reliable in the picture for our virtual reconstruction and what is fiction, what has not been done because the extension that they proposed has not been realized. One of the things that they had, and which is described in a lot of detail in the text sources, is in fact what they call a fire beacon. On one of the bastions, in fact, they had this structure, which is an iron basket, let's say, in which they could burn fire. And it's high up, so it's very visible from a distance. And fire beacons were something that is in fact pretty common along the coast and along the major rivers, even since Roman times. We have a lot of sources that tell about that in medieval times. In 17th century it's used. I think it was used up to the 19th century. A couple of these things even have been excavated. We know pretty well what these things are. And in fact, what they were used for is messaging. Even from the Roman times, they were doing messaging with them. They had a kind of, I would say, Morse system, or the kind of telegram system, in fact, but with smoke and fire, like some people say the Native Americans did, but we don't know that exactly. But in any way, we here in Europe did that, and for since the Roman times. And in fact, it was made in a network, so that means, in fact, every next fire beacon was at a visible distance. So one fire beacon could see the other, and so in this way, they made up a network, and they could pass on a message. We are being attacked. And that message was passed on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And in fact, from the data that we have, the speed of this message delivery was over 100 kilometers per hour. So better than a car, typically. So that means, in fact, in a couple of hours, if something was happening in Belgium, in the north of the Netherlands, they would know it. So that's what it was used for. And you see that very well depicted here in this iconography from the Rijksmuseum. One fire beacon is burning, and on the other side of the river, you see the other also burning. So they're messaging to each other. And that's the way it was used. Okay, so we have a lot of depictions of this. So we can figure out how these things were made. This is the typical way I do this. I make some sketches, and from these sketches, my 3D guys make, in fact, this kind of thing. And then, of course, we check everything in 3D, and sometimes we improve it a bit or change some details, and there you go. Okay. How did they make the fire? Well, they had this something special, which was in fact this. And it's still preserved. It's even in the museum in the Netherlands. These are rings of straw, and they were covered with tar. And these kind of rings, they were delivered in barrels. I think, I don't know how much a barrel contained, but let's say 50 of these rings. And they were calling these rings Turks. Maybe they look like a turban. I don't know why they call it like that, but they call them Turks. And so they were put in these fire baskets, and like you just have seen. And one of the things we have used extensively for this project is a military manual from the Saint-Rémy. I'll come back to that in a minute. And you see these things depicted there, and you can attach them to the wall. You can have a portable version. You can have a version that you put upright. And so you can really use this at night, and also not only to make signals in your fire beacon, but also to give light during the night. So we came up with this image. So we have a fire beacon burning constantly. We have all places here light because you need to do your walking, your watching during the night, and that everything is okay. You have a portable version of that. And even in the harbor, you see a lot of twinkling lights there, all illuminated, etc. Well, this is completely wrong. And why is it completely wrong? Like I said, you need to validate these kind of hypotheses, these kind of things that you think we should do this. Today, we would do that today because we are very wasteful, in fact, with our resources. That means, in fact, we would light everything up. We would make sure that everything has light, especially a fortress. You can be attacked at any moment, etc. No, it was not like that. When we look in the texts, in fact, they use about 100, maximum 200 per year. They had at least the storage of that. They probably didn't use them even as much. So they really use them for messaging, day and night, also during the day. And the strange thing is we don't know anything about this messaging language. How did they do that? We don't know. We know in the text, for example, that they even could signal that on the other side of the river, and where the other fortress was, that the midwife had to come because there was an urgent birth. There was an urgent problem with the child being born, so the midwife had to come over the river. They could signal that. How did they do that? We don't know. I haven't found any publication on that. I have been searching for that, but nobody, I think, ever came across a document that explained how it was used. Maybe it was a knowledge that was passed on, orally and never written down. Maybe it is written down, but we haven't digitized or come to that document yet. I don't know. At this moment, we don't know how it worked, but we definitely know it worked. It was used a lot. And it was also used for nightly light beacons, like you have seen that we thought it was done, but that in fact was done at the coast only for fishing. Certain fishes you can catch easier at night. And then, in fact, if you are with your boat in the middle of the sea in a pitch black night, and you want to come back to the harbor, it's very useful, in fact, that harbor is indicated where it is with these fire beacons. And they only lighted the fire beacons when the tide was high enough to enter the harbor. So that was the way it was done, and that's very neatly described in medieval texts. So was it used for lighting? Yes, it was. We have depictions of that, but only when there was, let's say, an attack or a problem. Then they could use these portable versions. Then they can use it to give light, but not on a daily basis. Because in fact, what you saw in the picture is, let's say, a use of about 200 of these rings per day, not per year. So that means, in fact, that we should be aware that we maybe look at it with our modern eyes in that way, but they were using just candles with a lantern to go around in a pitch black night to watch, in fact, and to guard their fortress. Absence of things. Carl Sagan said once, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And of course, he was pointing to extraterrestrial life. That was his thing that he was researching. But you can easily use it, in fact, in what we do also. A certain detail like a fire beacon is not always depicted. And here I've put 5 images. We have a couple more, but not so much more, of Lillo. And you see, for example, here in the early one in 1622, it's depicted. The next one, which is a very good and very detailed drawing, very precise and very reliable, doesn't contain it. You don't see it. The next one doesn't contain it. The next one in 1651 does contain it. It's here. And here, the painting a little bit later does not contain it. So we have 2 out of 5 that show it and 3 out of 5 that do not show it. But that's no proof it was not there, because it was a standard equipment of such a fortress. It was something which was used all over every day. And so it was there, period. And it's not because it's not depicted that it is not present. Okay. Right, we're a military fortress, so let's do some artillery stuff. And one of the things that, of course, is very useful in a military fortress are guns. The guns, in fact, the big cannons, the big guns which were used, and we know more or less which ones were used. Again, from the archival data, they never make a list. We have this list of, we have this number and this list of or type of guns. They don't never do that because that's common knowledge. Everybody knows that they had 11 guns. It's like that for more than 100 years. So there was a standard. And for example, we derived that from they had spare parts that they had to order. They had maintenance products that they had to order for the guns. From that, we can derive what kind of guns they had, but not, we don't have a direct list. But okay, that works. One of the things we know is that, in fact, these guns were on carriages with normal wheels. There's a whole technical thing I won't go in here, and you have also another type of carriage with full wooden wheels for permanently really having these guns up. But in fact, in practice, what was done in a fortress like this is that, in fact, there were nearly no guns operational on the walls. They were in storage. Because if you leave a gun, which is about 2,500 kilograms, or the bigger ones, even 3,000 kilograms, for a couple of months on these wooden wheels, they just deform. These wheels do not take that. They can carry it, but in fact, the pressure on these wheels makes them, deforms them. So they didn't keep them on it. And when they needed it, when there was tension, when there was an attack or whatever, they were quickly mounted on their carriages and, in fact, then put in position and used. So that means, in fact, that one of the nice things you need to do that is, in fact, this kind of tripod to put such a gun on its carriage. We have made a nice video how this works. Have a look at it. But I wanted to come to this famous technical manual, in fact, from a French general called Surrey de Saint-Rémy. And this guy has made a booklet of, what is it, about, I guess, 1,000 pages in total, that depicts every aspect of the military business. All its knowledge was, in fact, put in this kind of manual, and that's also the big reference document that we have. Of course, it's French. You always need to be careful when you talk about, in our case, we're talking about the Dutch army. Sometimes it's a little bit different, but like in this manual, the Dutch guns are depicted. It depicts the French ones, the German ones, the Dutch ones, etc. And to come to our tripod here, this is all very well depicted. And you have this what they call pulleys. And you see here there is a pulley with even 5 ropes, here with 3, with 4. That is simply depending on the weight of the gun barrel that you have to lift. So we'll come immediately to that, but you can have it simple like that. So the force that you apply here is the force that you apply there. That's one time. But if you have, for example, this one with 5, if you draw 1 meter of rope here, it only gets 20 centimeter up. So in fact, the force that you exert here is only 5 times smaller than the force which you exert here. So that is the way such pulleys work. That's important to know. I'll show that immediately. Because in fact, you see from the drawings that hoisting such a barrel was quite a heavy thing to do. Was quite a difficult job. So let's have a look at that, right? So how does it work? These kind of things. So what we have done, this is a typical standard gun of the Dutch army, 24 pounds. 24 pounds is the weight of the bullet, 11 kilogram and a half. And so that in fact is depicted here. And let's look at, let's say, a simple analysis of the forces which are there. Such a gun barrel is 2,500 kilogram, and you have a pulley, in fact, that pulls it up, but which is 5-fold. So that means, in fact, that if you have 2,500 kilograms here of force, you only have to exert 500 kilograms of force here to get it up. Okay, 500 kilograms, that's still a lot, right? But how do you do that? Oh, well, you have a winch, and that winch has a small diameter, and you exert these long batons and these long sticks. And in fact, the ratio between the, let's say, the radius of this winch here and the length of this baton, of this stick, is 1 to 12. So that means if you have to exert 500 kilograms here, you only have to push here 40 kilograms to get 500 kilograms of force here. That's the way it works. This is simple mechanics. Everybody can understand it quite easily. And so in this way, 40 kilograms, pushing 40 kilograms is still a good job to do, but that's feasible. And that means, in fact, with such a gun, with 2 people, you will probably manage to get your barrel up. If this is already a 3,000 kilogram one, I think you need 4 people to do that. You can put 2 people here, 2 people there, and when you push it down, you switch your baton to 90 degrees further, and you up, and there you go. And after a lot of cranking, in fact, you get the thing up. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we put behind the reconstruction. We do really calculate them all. To make sure that these things really fit. And like you have seen, it is a hard job. This is a picture which really describes, a bit exaggerated probably, how it works, how it was. It's a hard job to get it up, but you can do it. It's feasible. Let's now look at the next part of the story. So, okay, your gun is on the carriage, and now your gun needs to get up on the wall, which is 5 meters high. So how do you get your 3,000 kilograms? Because your carriage also has a weight. How do you get it up? How do you get it up there? 5 meters high. One of the things you find in this nice manual is this capstan. So the capstan itself is a device to do the job. Which means, in fact, that you have to swing the batons again, turn them around, and this way your winch again will take your gun up. Let's do the calculations. Typically, you see that you have 4 places that somebody can push. So typically, you do this with 4 people that go around the capstan and push, and in this way, get your gun up. Your gun is 3,000 kilograms plus carriage. And of course, it is a slope. It's not a very steep slope, but it's substantial. So that means, in fact, if your gun is weighing 3,000 kilograms, at least you need to exert 1,000 kilograms of force to get it up, because the other part of the forces still are on the ground, and you need only a part of that force to get it up. That's simple mathematics, simple mechanics, quite easy to understand. Again, we have to have 1,000 kilograms of force here. We get on the winch, and from that winch, in fact, we have to push on the button. So this is the ratio here is, let's say, 1 out of 10. That means that we have to exert 100 kilograms of force on these buttons times 4. So so that means 4 people have each to push 25 kilograms on each of the buttons to get it up. And that's feasible. That's, again, a hard job, but nevertheless, it's something you could do. So this is validating, but look at the drawing. And this is the etcher problem. The guy who was doing the etching, he probably got a sketch, a poor sketch probably. And so this sketch is full of problems. One, with these kind of small buttons, you don't do the job. These simply are too short and too small, too thin. So period. So that if you would try to do it, they would break immediately. Second thing is this winch here has to be fixed. That's why you have such a whole construction there. But the etcher forgot, in fact, to fix his vertical winch. You need to fix it here. Third thing is, if you would simply put buttons through a wooden block and you would do the job, your block would split immediately. Try it out, but it does like that. So that means, in fact, you need to put iron bands around it to keep it all together. So that is the kind of translation exercise that we have to make from drawings that sometimes contain errors to something that is more plausible, that is more correct. And here it's a very good illustration of somebody who made a drawing that has no clue what he was drawing, in fact. Okay. So that's about the sources. So that means, in fact, we have text sources, we have iconography. I will talk about maps in a minute. But there are many other sources, and especially sources that in most cases people don't think about when we do virtual reconstruction, and which give us additional information that helps us, in fact, to do a proper and a good reconstruction. And one of them, which to my opinion is very important, is experimental archaeology. Experimental archaeology is that part of the archaeology that tries out the things, that not only say, okay, this we found in the ground, we excavated, and here it is, and we describe it. No, they try it out. They try to understand what they find, and by trying it out. And I've put a number of lists here to give you a bit of an idea, but in fact, there have been a lot of experiments with this artillery, and have a look at the videos, then you will see what a 9-pound, and mostly we're talking about 24-pound bullets here, but the 9-pound is, let's say, 4 kilograms of weight. What that does to a wooden part of a ship. And have a look, you will be surprised. Same thing is for one of the things was not only these iron bullets that they were shooting, but they were shooting, for example, a canister, a metal box full of lead small bullets. And when they were shooting this, in fact, how does it distribute? So you have people that do that and then excavate all the bullets and make a map on how this really works. How far does it go? How much killing potential does it have, to really understand if you have, for example, if you excavate a battlefield, that you understand what has happened, or try to understand what has happened there. We have also some very nice slow motion recording of these guns. Have a look at that. We use other recordings. I didn't notice them here, but for example, for the sound, there are very good professional recordings, sound recordings and video recordings of these kind of reenactment events, and that give us the good, correct sound of a cannon, of a gun. So that is, have a look at it. I was looking for a link. I have somewhere a very nice link on mortars and grenades, but I didn't find it back in time. So I'll try to do that by this weekend, and I'll put an update. So I'll provide you the link. It's really nice to see, because grenades, in fact, are so dangerous today that we can't do them. They're considered too dangerous. It's not allowed anymore to do that kind of business today. That's what, in fact, reenactment is doing today. They do the least dangerous things. They shoot, in fact, without bullets. They shoot with very small cannons, etc. Most of the stuff that we are reconstructing here was really much more powerful, much more dangerous. And even with large reenactment events today, they have really the fire brigade ready. There are a lot of safety measures in place behind the scenes. Of course, you don't see that. But if you have 500 kilograms of gunpowder there for your reenactment, I can assure you that they are careful with that. They have to be careful with that. They are obliged. So that's the point. So, but anyway, experimental archaeology, trying this out and getting data from it is quite useful, and that brings us also to this reenactment. Like I was saying, and so they do this really in the field on kind of events and so on. And have a look at this is depiction of the 17th century. Your gun and your gun barrel. This is the cannons they use in reenactment. So the barrel is at least 2-3 times smaller, and the wheels are too big. Way too big. But anyway, so it's not, you need to also look at both things at the same time to understand in reenactment what you can trust and what you cannot trust. Because in fact, reenactment is a very, very useful source of data, but you need to be careful to understand what reenactment is. Reenactment, of course, preferences, spectacle, all the special things, not the common, normal things, but they are adapted to a tourist audience, of course, and not always are things very, I would say that loud and spectacular and exploding a lot and so on. But most of these things were much more dangerous, and they were killing in silence nearly, but that you cannot show in reenactment. And of course, like I said, there are safety measures, etc., etc. So you need to be careful when using reenactment as a source and on what is correct and what is not correct. Most of these people are very professional. They do a very good job, like medieval reenactors. They have a lot of knowledge on all the practical things they do, like sewing and leather making and whatever. And so they have a lot of knowledge. But on the other hand, you need to look through selective glasses, let's say, to see what is useful for virtual reconstruction and what is not. So that is important, but we use it all the time. We look a lot at reenactment stuff because there the practical knowledge is there. And that's what we typically miss a bit here and there in more academic research. That's how we use it to kind of complement that. And of course, yeah, like I said, reenactment can be useful for like sounds that we don't have, because these are things that don't exist anymore. So how do you get to the right sound of things? Of course, practical things like what in practice do you have for not only loading a cannon, but what you see here is cleaning the cannon. What do you need for that, and so on. So you need a water A cannon needs water, a water bucket, and you have a leather bucket, but that's where they put in the gunpowder. So that reenactment all learns you these kind of small details you will never get from any other historical source. And of course, it helps you also to see the research questions. What is if I want to show such a cannon, such a gun in action? What is the issue? What should I look for? Okay, and the same. Oh, I forgot to do this slide. Sorry, I will update that. Firing grenades, which means that grenades are exploding in the air. So that's very dangerous, and that is not done anymore today, period. You cannot do that. It's too dangerous. So we have to do that virtually. And also, again, the knowledge on these kind of things is very limited at this moment. There are only very few experts that know these things. I was looking, for example, to the military museum that we have in Brussels, and they simply say, sorry, we don't know these things. 17th century, these kind of things, no knowledge about that. And that's the way it is. And there are people in the world that know that, but there are very, very few. Okay, I'll fill it up in the updated version that I will provide this weekend. So if you want to see those details, you will see. Okay, good.
Daniel, sorry if I interrupt. I was wondering, because it's now 3 p.m., would you like to take a 5 minutes break?
I'm nearly there.
You're nearly there. Okay, perfect.
Give me another 5 minutes, and
sure.
then we'll do the break, right? Okay.
Sure.
Right. So functional analysis is simply looking and trying to understand how things work and why things are the way they are. So, for example, if you see Lillo, you see that it has a harbor, but a harbor with 2 quays. Why does it have 2 quays? Well, it in fact has 2 functions. One is local ships that come along and that transfer their goods on a local ship, and this local ship continues. And in the process of that, they have to pay tax. That was the main reason of existence for Lillo, was acquiring taxes on, because you were crossing, in fact, the border between the Netherlands and, let's say, today, Belgium. So there was the tax on the border that you had to pay. But you have another quay, and that other quay is, in fact, for local supplying the fortress. This fortress was really an isolated island of the Dutch country, of the Netherlands, in Flemish territory. And 1 kilometer around the fortress was considered to be Dutch, and all the rest around it was Flemish. Another country. So that means, in fact, that they had to bring in everything. And I mean literally everything. Clothes, foods, even water, they had to bring in the fortress. They had water ships coming with drinking water, etc. So that everything was delivered through this quay. So if we look, in fact, at, no, wait, one thing. You see on the depiction of the quay that there is a crane there. So we'll talk about the crane here. You can see the crane reconstructions here. So, okay. Sorry. When I was doing the research on these cranes, I was very disappointed because I didn't find them. There are very few depictions in iconography, because typically, of course, this is the romantic 17th century way of depicting the things, but goods are put on board or taken from a ship on your back. So this is all manually transported. A crane was not used so much. And here there is a very good depiction of the harbor of Antwerp from the 17th century. And if we zoom in here in the back, we see 1 crane there. And we see at least 300-400 ships in the whole drawing. So that means, in fact, it was something that was used for a special purpose. And that is what we try to understand here. So these cranes are in fact quite well known because they had another function also, and this was in fact for getting river water. This is, for example, from a brewery. This is a gutter, and so water was taken from the river, put in the gutter, and the water was going to the brewery to make beer there. The same here, you see the water bucket here, and it's a very simple construction with a counterweight helping you to get up your water. But this same system was also used, in fact, to get goods from the ship. And what's the point now? Well, why did they need a crane? Because in fact, in Lillo, we have a daily tide. Even today, you can be really surprised that you go there and the water is very low, and 6 hours later, it's 5.5 meters higher every day, up and down. So that means, in fact, that if your ship arrives, it can arrive like this at high tide, but it can arrive 5 meters lower if you come at low tide. And because they had to do so much transportation, they couldn't wait till the high tide. That was not possible. So they needed the crane, in fact, to be able to get the goods, even if they were 5 meters lower. So that's the reason for the crane. So again, this is all calculated with an iron counterweight, and we know how these things work and how they got the things from the ship. Okay, to conclude this first session, and then the next session after the break will be about the maps, about the historical GIS. But in fact, what we have seen, in fact, from this discussion is that virtual reconstruction is definitely a research tool. And that means, in fact, it is about preservation of knowledge. There are historical techniques that we have the knowledge of, in most cases where the knowledge is disappearing also. We have experts that know certain things, and in many cases, those experts are also disappearing because these departments are under threat. Look how many archaeological departments have been closed in the UK. Look here in Belgium, the archaeological department of the city of Ghent has been closed, etc. So experts can disappear, and they do disappear. So that knowledge will also get away, and also involve people that, for example, have excavated the site. You need to know their knowledge before they disappear, or before simply their team is dissolved, because then the knowledge also gets lost. So preservation of knowledge, to my opinion, is a very important task that can be done through virtual reconstruction. Second thing, like we have seen, is also recover lost knowledge that we don't have anymore, but by calculating, by looking at it, by trying to figure out how it worked. In fact, we can try to recover that lost knowledge. And bringing that all together, in fact, that is what virtual reconstruction is doing. It's making a consistent synthesis of the research. And of course, visualizing it, and that's the nice part. You can make nice images, you can make interactive stuff. We'll talk about that next session. But the main thing is this. It's really bringing together knowledge and putting that in something that is consistent in a consistent virtual world. So that means, in fact, one of the things that we need to do is knowledge management. And I had a meeting about that within our 4CH network yesterday in Den Haag. And so that is what we are working on. So the knowledge which is available, we should consolidate that. We should manage that. We should store that. I do that now through blogs that the public can read. But of course, we need a kind of professional version of that that keeps it in much more detail, and these things are not lost. One of the things we discussed yesterday was also we need the kind of 3D publishing mechanisms. If I have all this knowledge now, I tell you this through this presentation, but it would be much better if I could be able to publish these things, not through a normal article, but through an article in which incorporates my 3D, my 3D models, which has them in motion, which are interactive, etc. and have a look at the Pure 3D project. And that is something that is doing this kind of 3D publishing mechanisms. And of course, you need storage for that. That's also what we discussed yesterday. We were at DANS. DANS is the storage facility for the Netherlands for this kind of data. Just to give you the data that I have on Lillo, I mean, not the 3D, not the app, but the basic data from which we make the virtual reconstruction is 47 gigabyte. I now know this because my computer is lost, so I had to recover that from the cloud, and I saw that my total file is 47 gigabyte a couple of days ago. Right, and just one final thing, what is also useful in that, if we don't want to reinvent the wheel, somebody else has made scientifically correct historical assets. Can I reuse them? Well, up till now, not really. We had Sketchfab, we have Sketchfab. Sketchfab has a lot of very nice things. There's over 100,000 cultural heritage objects. Most of them are not documented at all. Only a few have proper documentation or proper links to documentation. And between what is called cultural heritage in that collection is still a lot of rubbish, to be honest. Do it test yourself, you will see, but it's a pity. In fact, they don't put effort on improving that. But that gives a room, in fact, for other people. And last week, in fact, there was an initiative launched. Have a look at that. And that's the first scientifically correct historical repository. It's our Spanish colleagues who make it, and they have already very nice objects. I hope my objects also get in there. But we invite everybody who is working on this and has good stuff to also look at this and try to put it in with these guys. They're picky. They really go for high quality. So this is a good sign. So, okay. Right, I'll close down. So homework I will make this weekend. I'm very sorry for the delay in this with losing my computer, but you will get the homework on the Google Drive this weekend. I will make, you have seen us, I forgot two small things on the presentation, so I will date it up and put the presentation, a new version of that, also on the Google Drive. And then we have a couple of other sessions that we won't do today because I didn't get them ready, but we will move them to part 3. Maybe part 3 will be a little bit longer than 2 hours, Illyria, if that is possible. But we'll manage to get everything what we have listed up covered, be it then also in part 3. And so after the break, let's have a, 5-minute break?
Yes, that works.
Yeah. Okay. After the break, we'll talk about historical GIS.
Perfect. Just a small thing. There was one question coming in the chat, which I think it would maybe be better to address now because it's really about one point that you raised. It's about the fire beacon signal. I don't know if the person asking the question would like to come on video and ask themselves. Otherwise, I can read it. It says this fire beacon signal triggers the entire network of beacons. And even where there is no danger, could the height of the fire be related, to the to the intensity of the danger?
Well, we don't know. They were putting. You see how it is built. Huh? So this the kind of pin, and you put the rings on it. You can put 1, 2, 3, 4. Indeed, this is one of the things that they could do. But we don't know. Did they do something with the smoke? Did they do something with the color of the fire by adding things? We don't know. I told you the example. If they can tell I need a midwife by signaling, well, then you need something sophisticated. But honestly, we don't know. So if somebody has research about that, knows something about that, please tell me. I would be very, very pleased to know about it. But I didn't find anything.
Okay, thank you. How to stop the light,
Yeah. It could be. You can add a couple of like lead salt or copper salt. Copper salt will make your fire green, for example, just by putting some salt on it. Maybe they did it that way. I have no idea. I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it's 3:15 now. Should we meet again at 20:00?
That's perfect.
And resume this session with the historical GIS.
Yeah, great.
See you in 5 minutes.
Okay, see you in a minute.
Welcome back.
Okay.
Please.
Here we are. So let me share my screen. Oops. Is that okay, Laria? Okay, good. Right. This part should normally be presented by my colleague, which was helping me in this project, the colleagues from the University of Antwerp. They helped us with the whole part on historical GIS. But unfortunately, Jason is away at this moment. He's abroad. And his colleagues Rogier and Lona are also in other projects working. So that's the reason why I take up, in fact, the presentation of their PowerPoint, of their presentation. It's also completely their work they did with their whole team on doing historical GIS. And let's say, to start with, what is GIS for those people that don't have a good notion of that? In fact, GIS system contains maps. It contains different layers of maps, and each of these maps has geometrical coordinates, and of course you map them in, you put them together in such a way that all the coordinates fit. If you have a certain place, you can look at different types of representing this geographical information. These different layers, in fact, are in such a GIS system. And to the elements in the maps, we can link data. We can link information, for example, who is living in this house, who is the owner of this parcel, what is the quality, water quality of this river, etc. All kinds of textual or graph or numerical information can be attached to it. That means, in fact, you can use it for management. You can, of course, look things up and try to find certain things, but you also can try to correlate the different layers. And if something here is like that, and it influences this, and you see that, you can do spatial data analysis. You can try to find out what the links are between certain aspects. That is what the GIS thing is. And of course, GISs are used already a long time. And that's also the reason why there is an open version, and the QGIS version is an open source version and also can be used for free. For free in this sense that, of course, it has certain limitations. For example, if you want to have a web browser available and your data in a web browser available, there are certain fees that you need to pay for that. But let's say the basic functionality is for free. Well, one of the things we need to do in the GIS is, of course, make maps. And that means, in fact, that we need to make sure that what we show and what we put in such a system has proper coordinates, has proper world coordinates that can be used to put it in such a geographical information. And that means also that today, everything we make map-wise is, of course, like that. We have very old and known processes of making maps, and orthophotographs and satellite photographs, and all these things are known how to put them in such a coordinate system and to come up with georeferenced maps and images. But of course, when we talk about old maps, these things did not know that, did not follow that. They tried to follow that because that's cartography, but they were not perfect. They were not, in this sense, so of the same quality as today. And that means, in fact, if we try to put then older maps on top of each other and older maps together, then we need to make sure that these things are geo-referenced, because otherwise an object here will not fit on the same object here on this map, because they are not in the same coordinate system or not drawn with the same spatial quality. So that means if we have, for example, an old map of the city of Antwerp and we have a new map of the city of Antwerp, if we really want to fit one on top of the other, then what we need to do is to find, in fact, points, things that still exist, like the cathedral that you see here. Of course, the cathedral is still there, and you can very well precisely indicate points there around the cathedral that can be mapped on here. And the same for other points. So you have a bunch of points, and in fact, these points then need to map from one to another. And so that is, in fact, what is this mapping transformation that needs to be done. That transformation helps you in fitting this old map on top of a new geo-referenced, perfectly coordinated map. And that means that in that old map, there are some small errors, can be deformations, can be all kinds of things, orientation also, like you have seen, but that means, in fact, that there are some algorithms, some ways on mapping one onto the other. I won't go in all the details of that. That's quite a special thing. It's also a difficult thing, and a thing that is sometimes giving very weird results. You need to be very careful what to use and what not to use. But on the other hand, it is useful. And if you have maps of a certain quality, and don't forget that even in the 17th century, we had very good map making. Belgium and the Netherlands is really the kernel, in fact, the cradle of map making. And that means that certain people, not all of them, but certain maps were of really high quality already in the 17th century. Okay. Second thing you try to do in maps is, in fact, try to delimit certain things. That means that you say, okay, what is, for example, this parcel, this property, this castle, for example, here is very well defined because it has a wall around it, and with the castle in the central, and it has other properties that also belong to that castle or to that place, and you can detect, in fact, the shape of that, and that's what they call a shape file. And of course, you can do that with points, you can do that with lines, you can do that with a polygon, a surface with the points on the edge. And so in this way, the shape files define areas, define certain properties, parcels, for example, that are useful to put in the map. And if we have these shape files, in fact, and like we said, there can be point. If you have an object which is small, you can just depict it with a point. It can be a line, for example, the border of something, or it can be a polygon, for example, a parcel. So in this way, in fact, when we do that, we can also link other documents to that. So that means that we, for example, if we have a written document about this property, then of course we can link that document to the parcel or to, for example, a market cross which is mentioned, which is then represented by a point, etc. Okay, so that means in fact that here the parcel that is described is linked and can be put in the database, in fact, because on the shape files you can link database entries, you can put in your text, you can put in the information of the text in this database. And so in this way also this can be used to understand older maps from newer maps. If you have a certain map and you have information about that, and you see that all the parcels here have numbers and have quite defined parcel boundaries, that information can be then tried to link to other maps, to other depictions of that. And so you see there are small deformations, small corrections to that, but again, you see, okay, this parcel is still preserved there, etc., etc. So you can make an evolution from one into the other, and so in this way, you can do really historical analysis. You can write, in fact, the history of this, the geographical history of this place over a certain time. Right, so how do we use that now for studying things in the past? So like we have said, old maps need to be georeferenced, needs to be deformed in such a way that they fit on the geographical raster, on the geographical reference. And then we can digitize the shapes, the parcels, the objects, the buildings which are in there, and we can try also to say, okay, this is a river, this is a meadow, this is a building. We can assign building types. We can add social information, like in Lillo, this is a military building, this is a non-military building, etc. We can have additional information that we know about the building. For example, what was the type of building? For example, if this was a storage room, or this has been damaged in the war, we can add iconography to it. This is the gatehouse of the fortress, and we have a depiction of that. And we can have also text material that comes from archives, like, for example, what was the tax they paid, well, how many people lived there, etc., etc. So that in fact means that georeferencing, in fact, we start from the current maps, in fact, of today, and we try to work back and try to plot, in fact, how the evolution was in time in a certain work environment. And if we do that for Lillo, here you see Lillo is here. This is the other fort, Pletinckx. This is the River Scheldt that you see here. And in fact, this is the zone that we are studying and that we want to put in the GIS. We have discussed beforehand why this zone, what do we want to show, what is important for us, etc. Of course, that kind of discussion, I won't go in detail there, but like I've shown last time, most of the stuff here that you see is today harbor. They're all industry, and you have these small islands, in fact, which are something else, river or nature reserves here, and heritage places and a museum, in fact, here. Okay, so let's zoom in on Lillo, and this is, in fact, the outline of the shapes which are there today. These are the water surfaces, for example. This is the harbor, which is there. And then, in fact, we can try to map old cadastre information that we have from the beginning of the 19th century, because that cadastre information is not older than that. They only started to do things like that in the beginning of the 19th century, and try to map that. And of course, our maps that we have from the youngest military maps that we have from Lillo are from the beginning of the 19th century. So they are useful, in fact, to then also put that cadastre information on top of that. And if we do the mapping properly, and then we see that the red lines, which are the shapes of today, fit quite well with the old military maps, and so in this way we all stack that together. Right. Let's take older maps. One of the most detailed and beautiful maps is the Hattingham map from the 17th century, from the 18th century, sorry, and that is in fact again from the 19th century. We're trying to go back to the 18th century, and then later on we even try to go back to the 17th century. That's the way we try to do it. So this Hattingham map is really very detailed, well described, has a lot of information, well made, is a good, reliable map. So that has been the basis, in fact, you see it here, the basis on trying to map the whole thing, and you see the control points which have been defined, and then try to map that onto the shape of today. And you see that we need a bit of changes and deformations there. Like, for example, the orientation of these bastions. That's the typical error that surveyors make in that time. The reason for that is now surveyors use techniques, in fact, to eliminate these kind of small orientation errors, which was not used in that time already. So that means, in fact, that you see that these things are a little bit off, and so that we need to skew them, in fact, a bit to get in the right place. This is the way it's done. It's a bit too weird because it does also deformations that are not useful, like curving this, but that is, you could of course do a lot of things to prevent that, but in this sense where the people from the university have not done that because it was not really meaningful, useful to do that. And in this way, this old map has been completely geo-referenced there, with, like I say, a little bit of other small artifacts in there which do not really have or give problems in what we want to do. Okay, so we have different land registers and cadasters that we have available from the beginning of the 19th century and other maps, and these are all put in. So a big number of maps has been put in this historical GIS to get as much as information as possible out of this, not only maps, but also textual information, cadastre information. Here we see depictions also in the 19th century and put there on older maps. Okay, so this is the working environment that we have made at the University of the Department of City History, Urban History in the University of Antwerp has made. And in fact, from that, what we have tried to find out is what information do we have on the type of buildings, so that we got information on the reconstruction. Because if you have a map, what's the third dimension? Is this a small house? Is this a high house? Is this a storage room? Is this a garden? If you just have a parcel drawn there, what is it? So that's basically the kind of information that we have tried to extract. And unfortunately, most of that information comes from not from a 17th century map, because that was not available here, but from an 18th century map, where we have information in the texts, in fact, that these things pretty much stick to their place. So that means not much has changed over time. So what was there in the 18th century was most of it, let's say 90% valid in the 17th century. And what has changed? Most of that we were able to track that. So I think we got it pretty correct. Difficult to put a number on that, but I would guess we get something like 95%. There will be things that are not correct, but it's missing information. We cannot help about that unless we would try to put in new information. But I think here in this effort, most or nearly all of the information which is available has been thrown in. So we won't do better in the future if we had more information. Okay, so
Daniel, may I stop you 1 second because there's a question from Isabel, which is, what does cutting and merging GRB polygons mean?
What is, I didn't understand.
Does cutting and merging GRB polygons mean?
Yeah, the GRB is the reference the reference plan of today. That is a GRB. I think that's a Dutch term. Sorry, it's not. But cutting and merging means, in fact, the normal process of parcels that get divided or get merged. Huh? So you need to look at that process. In properties, typically, and that's very useful to know that properties stick to the ground. That means that a property, the shape of a property does not really change over time. We have, in the many reconstructions projects that we have done, we have seen that in fact this is nearly everywhere valid. Except if you get these kind of total reorganizations of land use that sometimes happen. But if you don't have that, if you have a kind of natural flow of the things, then parcels really stick to the ground and don't change borders and don't change boundaries. What happens, of course, is that the parcel can get divided. A father has 2 sons and divides his property over his 2 sons. Or I buy the property of my neighbor and I join it with my property. And so the things get splitted and merged. That's the kind of historical process that, of course, you need to try to get a hold of and that you need to grasp to come from a 19th century map to a 17th century map and try to get a kind of good representation of the 17th century situation. Is that answering the question? Yes. Okay.
I think so.
Okay, good. Right. So where are we? So that is, you see that we have here what is a bit fluid. You see that is, of course, the ditches. Sometimes the ditches are getting a bit smaller, a bit bigger. They enlarge it, they make it deeper. So while making it deeper, they enlarge it a bit. So that's a bit fluid. You see that, But the parcels of the buildings, that sticks really to the ground, and that doesn't change, except if you make really big changes. Here, this is a relatively new building of the 19th century. And of course, what was there was destroyed and completely tabula rasa and something new on top of that. But for like these properties, they stick to the ground, really. They don't change over time. And that's what we use for most of it, in fact, by trying to get all the information on these parcels, assuming that most of these things stay the way they are. And if there are changes, that they are typically recorded in the archival data that we have. Okay, this gets a bit messy, but okay, let's, with all the different layers, but that basically is what we got finally as a result. This is our historical GIS map of Lillo in the 17th century. Now we have not an old map, we have a modern geo-referenced map, in fact, of this 17th century situation. And you see with the bridges there, you have seen already many of the elements that I have shown before. Our fire beacon is here, for example, and all the different information that we have now. The next thing we need to do is try to make this in 3D. All right, so as you have seen, already a base of that is in fact merging, cutting and merging these polygons. That is vectorization. You need, in fact, a kind of line that says, okay, this is the parcel, this is this property, this is that property, this is a house, this is a garden, etc. So that's the kind of information now where we're working towards to make then the next step, which is the 3D reconstruction. And of course, we have several maps from the 17th century so that we can try to see, okay, is there any change there, and try to get as much as possible to the 17th century. We have these kind of maps, which are quite good from the beginning of the 17th century. And you see that is mapped onto the GIS form. So in this way, we get really to a situation that depicts the 17th century with all geographical information. Right, so now the spatial reconstruction that takes into account the social data. So we have, in fact, most of the work that they have done is trying from all the archival data, get out economic functions. This is a pub, this is a public building, this is a military building, etc., etc. This is a small house, this is a rich house, etc. And do a bit of social stratification, because there was quite a lot of social stratification in Lillo. You would be surprised, from the poorest people, the poorest soldiers, even to the really very top class officers and commanders, etc. And that kind of information we now try to get in the map. And also we have information about, it's an 18th century thing again, but about the result of a siege. Lillo has only been sieged once in its whole history. It hasn't fought much. It was a very good fortress, so it deterred, in fact, a lot, and there has been only one big battle, in fact, in Lillo. But that one battle did a lot of damage, and so that damage also we have tried to map to also get a hold of, okay, how military-wise these things functioned. Is it really protected from that side, and does it from a military point of view is like we think it should be. Okay, so this is middle of the 18th century. This is straight on the map from the information from the data, no, the recordings, in fact, in the 18th century about the different parcels and about the different functions. And this is what we know of each of these places. And the purple things are military. The gray things, the dark gray things are living houses. The small gray things are adjacent buildings, like storage rooms and garden buildings, etc. The green things are, of course, gardens and even a couple of small vegetable gardens, and even a couple of small tree gardens with a couple of trees. What else do we have? Of course, we have the walls, like the ramparts. We have the red thing is the walkway, on the high part, the bridges, the entrance here. All this information has been stored. And also we have information. The shoemaker lives here. This is the church. This is the house of the commander, etc. So that is a lot of information. Who lives where? The bakery was here. There was a shop here, etc. And if you buy wine, you do have to be here, etc. This is social stratification, where live poor and richer people. And so this here has been taken from a map that gives the value of the property. And so higher value, lower value, so that you get an information. Plus, of course, the other colors is just functional. And this is the war damage that was inflicted on during the siege. And you see that basically the walls in that time, I say 18th century, do not protect much. They really shoot far enough, and I didn't go into that detail, but they shoot also not in a straight way, but in a curved way. And these kind of bombs that you can then launch then end up in the city and inflict a lot of damage. For example, the church here has been completely damaged and rebuilt. So the red ones are completely damaged, and let's say the yellow ones are a bit damaged, etc. So that's the information we have. Right. So we do not have a lot of iconography to deal with all the buildings, all the internal buildings, the entrance, the gatehouse, the bridges. We have, it's not so much information that is available. Most are maps from above, but that do not show the shape or the size of a bridge, for example. So we have to find that from other sources. But we have quite a lot of detailed information around the 1640 period, because before that period, there were high political and military tensions. So they have rebuilt and renewed a lot of things. And there we have the documentation, the tender documents, we have the description, how the work is going. So there we get a lot of detailed information on how everything looks like, if it is in stone or in wood, for example. And that information is textual information, but helps us a lot in the reconstruction. For example, here you have seen already this drawing, and there also you recognize the quay and the house on the quay and the boats on the quay and the walls, and then a couple of high houses which peer out. And here one that is somewhere in the neighborhood of the gate, with the question, did we have a gate building or not? Well, if you look in that 5,000-page document, finally you find, I believe, 2 small sentences that give you the information that says there is no gate building here. The other sister fortress had a gate building, but this one didn't have it. So it's another house, it's something else. We know what it is, but doesn't matter now. This is really a puzzle, a search that you need to do from all the information that you have. But this is one of the 7 drawings that we have, how Lillo looked like from ground level, let's say, to give you a bit of an idea how houses look like. But of course, we have these detailed maps. And by the way, to do these kind of projects, what you need are very high resolution scans. You see, this is one pen draw, so that means this is less than 1 millimeter wide. So that is what you see here is only a couple of centimeters wide. But that gives you a lot of information on that there is a double bridge, for example, etc., etc. And these things are described in text, so you can correlate both of them. You see the guns here, the cannons, and so on and so on. So here the gate, and then you don't see the bridge, and there is no gate building like you see here on the map. But that's not decisive. Sometimes they don't draw the building at all from above. So you cannot conclude here, I don't see a building, there is no building. No, that doesn't work like that. But on the other hand, the textual information says clearly what kind of type this entrance is, and it does not have a gate building. So, okay. It has, of course, a stone structure, but it has no upper structure that goes above the wall. This is from another map, other depictions. You see the same, the 2 gates. You see even a place where there is for the guard. You see schematic depictions, in fact, of not only of the entrance, but also of the house where the guardians that were responsible for the gate lived and were housed. Okay. So what archives were used? Most of these things are in the state archives in Antwerp. There is an archive on the Belgian level, and the Rijksarchief, and also there are coheres, and so that give, in fact, all the, like we have seen, the value of the houses, etc. That are all available from these archives. And here you see them. That's the source from the house, and then the value. And here the bakkerij van Jan can't read it. So Jan had a bakery and the value was this. So, and then of course we can try to find out this street by street. So you can find out where the bakery is and what the value of the house is. Right, so that means in fact online archive, that means that this all information has been put in the web viewer. So you can look at this interactively. And these are the different layers in the GIS that you can put on and off, which means the base card, sorry, it's in Dutch, the base map of today, the Ferraris map of the end of the 18th century, the map of the middle of this 18th century, the map of this 17th century, etc. So you can, so you have the streets, you have the buildings, you have the normal ground plan, you have the damage from the war damage, you have the social stratification, and you have the socio-economical functions there. It does go to the web viewer. So yeah, you see different layers being loaded. So I can turn off the buildings, I can turn off the streets, I can turn off the whole of the historical map, and then you see in fact what it is today, and you can.
Sorry, Daniel, we can't see it actually.
You can't see it? Oh,
no,
yes.
We can't see the web viewer.
Oh, very sorry. Yes, stupid me. I should stop the sharing, and then I should share, of course, the. Do you now see it?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I'll do again. So this is the historical GIS that you see. And so this is, for example, the orthophoto of today. You see the nature reserve, you see the harbor, you see the buildings, you see the water, which is still there today. And then you can put on, for example, this is the Ferraris map that you can put on top of it. And you can then show the historical map. You can turn on the streets, the names of the streets. You can turn on all the buildings. You can put, for example, the social economical function of it and so on. So this is the GIS. So this allows you, and you can, of course, change and zoom and so on. So that is in fact the whole thing we had to do our reconstruction, because next session I will talk how I turn this information into 3D, how we did that. So that process I will show next time. Okay, now I need to switch back. So I stop sharing and I share again my other thing. Yes, here we go. My PowerPoint share, right. Oops, no, wrong. Sorry. Okay, and that was it. Sorry, I didn't know I was at the end.
Right on time.
Right on time. Okay, good. Stop sharing.
Perfect.
Okay.
Excellent.
Right. Any questions?
Yeah, exactly. We have 1 minute for questions, and or otherwise we can also decide that we take them on the beginning of the next session. Or but if there's one question, I think we do have some time for it.
Okay. By the way, I will, in the documents that I will share in the coming days, I will definitely also put in the link, because I see they forgot to put the link up there, but the link should be visible that you can try it out yourself. So
perfect. Yeah, so probably on Monday, I guess, Daniel, Monday, Tuesday at the latest, you will receive an email from us with the link to the recording of the session today. Of course, the Google folder link, you already have it. It's not changed. We send it anyways.
Okay.
And probably we're also going to upload the homework on the Google
Yeah,
folder.
I will do that in the weekend if everything goes well, and then if Murphy doesn't come along again, and then yeah, and then I'll normally this evening I have my computer back so I can work again in a normal way, and then I get these things ready, and so that by next Monday you can put that up.
Perfect. And Sarah is asking, is the deadline for homework still on Thursday? I would say so, because it helps Daniel if he can see the results of the homework a little bit before the coming session, and he can address that at the beginning of.
Because I need to address it on Friday. So
exactly. So please, yes, still on Thursday at noon. Let's say.
Yeah.
Okay. So well, thank you everyone for your participation, and see you next Friday. Same Zoom link, same hour.
Okay.
And
We'll
thank
be
you so
there.
much, Daniel.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you all for watching and for being present here. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend also. Hi, Henk.
Hi, Daniel.